to another episode of Kirby Russia. Today's topic is going to be sort of the ideological foundations as to why the Ukrainian conflict is happening right now. Why this current Ukrainian culture that's in Kiev, that's a lot of K noises, excuse me, is so anti-Russian. What is sort of the foundation of all of this? And we're going to talk to a man who knows a lot about this topic. A lot. His name is George Eliason, and he is a conservative journalist who has been living in the Donbass for quite some time, and he is going to lay out really sort of the mental framework of what's happening. It is going to be absolutely fascinating, but warning, it's going to get dark. Now, I think, guys, as some of you have watched my material over time, as a Clevelander, I've noticed a lot of people in Cleveland deal with sort of their, I don't know, the dark side of life with a lot of, dark humor, sarcasm, and all that. So I hope you never think I'm taking light of any of the topics I discuss. I'm a Clevelander. It's my breeding. It's sort of my psychological programming. We're sort of, almost all of us are like that, right? But today, guys, this is going to get a little bit dark here. So, warning about that. Darkness warning incoming. So, pretty soon we're going to talk to George about the ideological foundation of modern Kiev. But for now, I'd like to give a few bits and pieces of my thoughts on the issue before we get to the real expert. All right, guys, what if you were going to have to try to put a face on the United States? If we were going to boil down America to like one person, one particular American, well, Thomas Jefferson would be a good candidate. I mean, he's sort of the ideological driver that really, he's really sort of the creator of the very basics of the American idea. People would say, George Washington, he was the general who won the War of Independence, but I think Jefferson's ideas that I think were really of the founding fathers. Maybe he was probably the most important one, right? We could say that. Another person who was definitely important, Abraham Lincoln. Slavery, gone, won the war, kept the Union together. He did it. He did something very, very hard. His presidency was probably the hardest challenge of any president's time, with a war amongst his own people, on his own territory, and somehow he did it. So, Lincoln, you could definitely say he's our guy. I bet some more modern people might say, well, what about Martin Luther King Jr.? Isn't it in some ways like if Thomas Jefferson was sort of the idea man of like the founding fathers period, in some ways we're all sort of repeating the words of Martin Luther King Jr., aren't we? I mean, his idea of this, I have a dream that we're going to be in this America where people aren't judged by the color of their skin, this sort of melting pot America, and we're all going to have similar values, and he was also a man of faith, Protestant faith, like the majority of Americans. So someone could say, hey, Martin Luther King Jr., he would make a good, this single American figure, maybe it would be him. But on the other hand, each of these figures, although for the mainstream audience are very popular, obviously the other sideline would see it differently. Because trust me, feminists and SJWs and all that, they hate Thomas Jefferson. They hate all the founding fathers, but they hate people like Thomas Jefferson. They hate his value system. His classical liberalism is not good enough for them. So they would hate having him become the symbol of America, right? There's probably some people in the South who, although they're probably not particularly passionate about slavery, are still a little bit salty as to how the Civil War went down. So I could definitely see that the Lincoln, although overall has a very positive image in America, I'm sure there's some small, solid minority that despises him and wishes he would have lost the war. And if we get to Martin Luther King Jr., there are definitely some people who do not agree with his message of let's all sort of unite under this American ideas, and a little bit of religion too, and sort of, hold hands and all that. Because if you haven't noticed, there's a lot of hate in the media. So Martin Luther King Jr. would certainly not suit certain people, especially people who do not like people of an African persuasion, right? So there's really no way to pick this sort of perfect leader, but I think all three of those candidates, at least for the majority of Americans, for now, until the media completely destroys our concept of history, at least for now, the majority of Americans could maybe kind of get on board with some of those kind of figures, right? Now, with Ukraine, when they were trying to rebuild their ideology, in the early, 1990s. And before that, in a lot of ways, there were still some ideological developments happening during the Soviet Union and going pretty far back, all the way to World War II. The Ukrainians, well, who did they decide to make their guy? You know, whose image, whose face was really the representation, especially of the Maidan Revolution? That's Stepan Bandera, a guy who worked with the Nazis and is associated with race-killing terror. One thing that's very sad is I can see that his Wikipedia page in English has been quite whitewashed. In fact, if you wanted to quickly read up on him, click his Wikipedia article, go to the Russian version, and then Google Translate the Russian version. There's more of it. But long story short, killed a lot of Jews for being Jews in Lvov, also known as Lviv, back around the sort of World War II era. He was also known for causing a lot of terror within Poland and being quite hateful towards not only the Jews and the Poles, but also Russians, Ukrainians he disagreed with, and Hungarians as well, which is kind of surprising. How many Hungarians are out there? Well, enough for him to hate them. So our guest is going to talk very soon about the nature of this Bandera guy, what he was up to, and the crimes associated with his, it wasn't even a regime because he was in his power, with his political movement, we'll call it, right? But the thing I want you to remember is that during the Maidan Revolution and for Ukrainian nationalism, this guy is the key figure. He is the Thomas Jefferson. He is the Abraham Lincoln. He is their Martin Luther King Jr. Okay? And they chose this guy. That means something. And as soon as you're going to choose someone who has this record of willful, gleeful ethnic violence in their background, well, that's going to cause problems. And it did cause problems. And now we're at war. So anyways, let's talk to our guest, self-described conservative journalist George Eliason, about the dark history behind the ideology of the Ukrainian Maidan Revolution. George, of all the people I've talked to with a lot of personal experience related to the war in the Donbass, some of the things you told me before this interview were the most chilling of all. As we were, setting up the camera and all that. Could you then at least just start to describe to our audience what the hell is happening down there?
Sure. Well, it's actually, I wrote an article, that was published in Modern Diplomacy. EU policymakers picked up on it, and they're considering it for Ukraine, their Ukraine policy. Because before everything broke loose right now, Ukraine was failing. And when we say failing, we're not talking about, well, their economy's, getting worse or this or that. It's that the separation from Russian gas and oil supplies has tanked them, and they won't even be able to bake bread soon. Ukrainians cannot afford gas and oil other than what comes from Russia. Now, this is a country that has the second biggest proven gas reserves in Europe, next to Russia. Problem is, it's 5,000 meters below the surface and they have to frack it. Now, fracking only works when gas is at high prices. So when they cut off Nord Stream 2 from Germany, that ended low prices worldwide. You'll notice that Joe Biden cut off U.S. production. He cut it right down. They cut off the Keystone Pipeline, which was cheap oil, cheap gas, right? And before that, Venezuela supplies were cut off. 10% of the U.S. supply right now is from Russia. But even that, transport costs from, Russian supplies to there are very expensive. So why is Joe Biden doing all this? Ukraine got cut out of the transit game, cut off from their own supply, and now they're stuck paying for very expensive gas and oil, which would come from the Caspian Sea or Azerbaijan. Germany has been cut off from cheap gas and oil. The rest of Europe. As a result of this, if you look at the UK, now BP itself was committed to shutting down all their platforms in the North Sea by 2050. Because Nord Stream is cut off, it's shut down, BP is ratcheting up production on all the old platforms. And this is all very expensive oil and gas. They can't sustain production for under $80 a barrel. All right, now we're heading up to what? We're at 100. All right, right now, all these old platforms, all the expensive platforms are all making big money, buku dollars, which is what they want right now. Now, how does this support Ukraine? Well, what it means is if Ukraine gets in a position to start fracking again, Ukraine there's a lot of production dollars there. But unfortunately, Ukraine's own people can't afford their own gas. They'd have to, Ukraine right now, if they could frack all the gas they needed, they would have to sell their gas and find some way to buy cheap Russian gas so their own people could afford it. Now, the end result of this is that all businesses are shutting down. And the Ukrainian government, all their experts across energy, economy, you name it, agriculture, are all saying the same thing. Without that cheap supply, there is no wheat field. Farmers can't afford to plant. Farmers can't afford to harvest, and farmers can't afford to dry the wheat. It affects the fertilizer industry. And they're predicting and have a very strong uptick in demand right now, worldwide. Ukraine should be able the plants should be able to gear up. The plants should be able to be very profitable. But what the high cost of gas is doing, even in that market with a high demand, they're closing. The plants themselves are big gas consumers. They cannot afford to make the product. And in Ukraine, that's coming across the board right now. And we're talking about everybody from hairdressers to bakeries, to the local gym, to government offices, to hospitals. Pick your business. They're going under very, very soon. The sources for this information are Ukrainian government and experts. Okay? It's not my own choice, cherry-pick sources. The former head of Zelensky's administration, Andrei Bogdan, spent a lot of time explaining this. And what Zelensky did and what Biden did is, instead of trying to help the situation, trying to work through it, they pushed the Ukrainian government into war. And Zelensky, his only real move in this is to go to war. How do you tell your own people, hi, we destroyed everything, you have nothing left, but I'm the president? What do you think they're going to say? All the tanks on the front line will spin around toward Kiev. You'll have a real Maidan, because the Ukrainian government caused the actual Holodomor that Ukrainians and Ukrainian diaspora really, really like to vilify the Soviet Union about, which back in the 30s was a naturally occurring event. That there were some mistakes, but it couldn't be stopped. The black mold was there, the harvest was ruined. Now, with his only move being to start the war, what Zelensky did, and it went under the wire in most media sources, they fired shells on the city of Belgorod, Russia. That was the morning the war started. A few days before that, they fired on and destroyed a Russian border post. Now, these are acts of war. These were military munitions being fired on Russian territory by the country that's been saying they're at war with Russia for the last 8 years. They did a great job protecting Europe from what? They took your money, and in Ukraine, they're moving it all offshore. Joe Biden just gave Zelensky $1 billion, and he turned around and gave that billion to Akhmedov, who was building a steel mill in Mariupol with it. Well, you've got this billionaire oligarch being given $1 billion for a steel mill that's for profit. He's not in it to help the people of Mariupol or around there. And I mean, that's just a fact. If he was, he's already a billionaire. What's he been up to? Look at his record. Europe gave Zelensky $1 billion. And now we have these stories coming out of Zelensky's offshore accounts. And yes, guess what? How much? $1 billion moved offshore also. So here we are with this situation, and Ukrainians are in a situation, general Ukrainians are in a situation where they're going to starve, and there's nobody there to help them.
Okay, so if I'm following your logic, you believe that during the first Maidan Revolution, 40,000 well-organized people sort of showed up and rose up and, caused a revolution. But this time, it was looking like 30 million people might rise up in revolution. Now then, it seems on the surface logical that yes, starting a war with Russia would be able to sort of blame them for a lot of the problems and kick the can down the road. But the problem is, fighting a war against Russia is utterly hopeless. That it wouldn't really keep the Kiev regime in power for much longer. In fact, it would pretty much guarantee that the final nail would be put in their coffin.
Well, you have a couple of reasons. Now, you have the people that started Maidan. Okay, now, if you look at Dmitry Yarosh, for instance, do you actually know anything about his history?
Very little.
Okay. It starts out with a little guy they called Snot. Mm-hmm. That was one of his nicknames. Most people know him as Stepan Bandera. Bandera was a 1930s, 1940s Ukrainian nationalist leader of the OUNB. Now, when Bandera was betrayed and killed by Yaroslav Stetsko, in return for being able to take Ukrainian nationalism nationwide in the U.S. among the diaspora, in the 1980s, he passed away. His wife, this is where the story gets interesting, Slava Stetsko, took over the OUNB worldwide leadership. OUNB took over the Ukrainian diaspora in America in 1980. 1991, or actually it was after 1991, she became the only World War II Nazi leader to go back to the country where she committed the Holocaust, murdered a few million people, and became a national leader in the Senate, the Rada. When she went back, Yarosh, she had, with her political party, she also had a militant section, okay? Militant group. The leader of the militant group and her bodyguard was a little kid named Dmitry Yarosh. He is actually literally the second generation OUNB leader of OUNB Ukraine. There's been a big tussle over who's the leader worldwide, who's this, who's that. He chose to move into the private sector and finish her work in Ukraine. Now, Ukraine itself was founded on Ukrainian nationalism, and there are a couple different versions of it. You had OUNB, which is Bandera. You had OUNM, which is Melnik. Now, before the Soviet Union collapsed, the Ukrainian diaspora actually had the recognized government of Ukraine in exile that the West recognized. It was the only one. Ukraine was the Soviet Union. Okay, the great Ukraine, geographically. The government itself was a diaspora government in exile. It was recognized. It had representation it was given funding. All right? It's kind of like China. Taiwan was China until 1972, until Nixon recognized mainland China. There was no China other than Taiwan. Well, after the Soviet Union collapsed, OUN M, which had the Ukrainian government, had to turn over the government of Ukraine all the symbols of state to the new Ukraine. All right, they didn't want to do that. But when they did it, it was with the condition that every president would be a nationalist. And basically signed a contract for that. The Orange Revolution was about, okay, we started this, you messed it up, we're resetting it with a revolution. Well, they couldn't get the violence out. The Information Operations Group, SCL, it's Strategic Communications Laboratories, I told you about them earlier. They went to work and they were the ones that pushed the Orange Revolution through, okay, in media. Everything you know about the Orange Revolution was one of their scriptwriters. All right, probably picked a color too. Now, when that went forward even more, Ukraine had another bunch of corrupt, opportunist leaders. And then you had Yanukovych. And they hated Yanukovych. And Yanukovych was not really with them. Yanukovych would agree to something, okay, we'll be Ukrainian nationalists, and then turn around, I haven't got any idea what that means, so let's go do something else, all right? Well, they couldn't live with that. Around 2000, about 2006, the actual leaders of the OUN worldwide decided to dump them. And they started concentrating on building up the kids, building up leaders and actual soldiers. So you have the youth groups, Sum, and what's the name of the other Ukrainian youth group? Sum and the other
Was
one.
it Svoboda? Or were they not for youth?
No. There was Plast. Plast is the big one.
Yeah.
Plast is the Bandera one.
Mm-hmm.
They took over those and they started building them up. Okay? Leadership. From age 6, you're going to be a Ukrainian nationalist, damn it, and kill Russians. That's what you're going to do. Well, they built it up enough until they had enough of that generation brainwashed. And then they had Maidan. And that's when the hands changed from OUN-M, and you can tell the different government structure. Under OUN-M, it's more parliament. The president is weaker. Under OUN-B, you have a stronger president and a weaker parliament, okay, under Ukrainian nationalism. So it doesn't take a brainiac. All you have to do is look at who's holding the reins right now in Ukraine, and you can see which faction is in control. OUN-B took over at Maidan, and Dmitry Yarosh came out in front. Okay? And that leads us, where we are today. Well, they're great at, destroying things. And the problem with the OUN is that they never actually sat down and decided on an economic policy. Being a nationalist is good enough. That's good enough. As long as everyone's nationalist, everything will be okay. Well, guess what? No, you still need somebody that understands economies. You still need people that understand diplomacy. Well, what's Ukrainian nationalist diplomacy comprised of? It's literally written down in their ideology. It's one thing. Do what I tell you to do, or we're at war. Okay? And, that's about they're very emotionally undeveloped people. And that's the only way to describe them. Now, where did the hatred of Russia come from? That actually had to come from somewhere. Well, the first round of Ukrainian nationalism was under a guy named Simon Petlura. Now, it was the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, and Petlura was a happy communist until they told him he couldn't be the leader in Kiev. Then he became a nationalist and fought the communists, and that was the only reason why. And Petlura massacred over 100,000 people in 1 year in Ukraine. And he is the great leader that started this all off. And it was the government that's based on his form of government and leadership that was handed over to this Ukraine in 1991. Now, his government, when they lost, they only had a kind of a quasi, we're going to have a state kind of thing going on for a little less than a year. Well, they fled and they went to America. And they started all the diaspora structures that paid for everything that happened. You're talking, let's set up a business, grow it. One business that they own that is dedicated, has always been dedicated for 70 years to setting up a Maidan in Ukraine, is worth over $100 million. That's just one. Okay? They have the biggest lobby in America, and they combine with other lobbies. The voting bloc by itself has elected a lot of presidents.
Okay, well, how did this Ukrainian lobby get so much money? What is this all connected to?
Well, it's not just linked to what, it's linked to who. The way it started out was, Joe, we're going to have a free Ukraine someday, so, look, you go to church, you give God 10%, free Ukraine is worth 15%, Joe. Okay? You got it? All right. And that's what they did. Now, the leaders took this money and they invested it in businesses. And they invested it in media. And they invested it and they invested it. Well, what's that freaking mean? Now, you had a guy that began the Dow Jones Industrial. Okay? That guy, it'd be worth some money, wouldn't it? They bought his property in New Jersey. That's where their camp is. That's their, little capital. They bought Dow Jones property. Now, this is back in the day. How much money do you think that's worth? Okay, it's in Bounding Brook, New Jersey. That's a big penny. Well, even back then, with much fewer people, that's what they did. During World War II, they were supporting the Nazis. They were actually phoning them and giving them orders to Bandera, because Bandera's in prison. So they're calling the Ukrainian Nazis on the phone and giving them orders to fight against the Allies. All right? They had enough money back then, right after World War II. They wanted to build their own Air Force. They had the money to build an Air Force. Now, where did this come from? They have a big insurance company. Like the door-to-door salesman insurance guys? Yeah, but there was only one for the entire nationality. And they ran other businesses that way. So everybody's buying life insurance, okay? You're paying the premium. And they're taking that money and they're investing it. And they've got the inside score on the investments. They're also doing it and taking it back into politics. Now, with politics, you're looking at it both ways. You're getting influence and you're getting information from politicians. There was a big thing recently about Nancy Pelosi and insider trading. And she said, well, it would be un-American to stop this. Yeah, okay. Yeah, because that's how they made their fortune. The people that are work in, I'm having a brain fart, whichever it is that monitors the stock exchange, okay, and Congress, they get inside information. And they decided it's legal for them to use that. Well, their friends get that information. Now, in Ukraine, what's the big payoff? Well, think Burisma. No, seriously, think Burisma. Now multiply it by 10. Do you think there's just one thing going on in Ukraine? And this is the most corrupt place on earth. Okay, the corruption is corruption, and when you're looking at, you could be looking at media channels. You could be looking at. It's just an endless array of different functions that can generate money off the backs of the Ukrainian people. And where are they getting the money? The average Ukrainian athlete. They're getting it from America, from tax dollars. So you've got one hand is paying the other, but eventually it all comes around and the piper has to get paid, and that's your tax dollars hard at work for you. And that's just the way it rolls, baby. Not everybody's conservative.
So the picture you're painting sort of looks like this. That the Ukrainian diaspora over time sort of became a little bit, separated or disappointed with what Ukraine turned into, especially during the Soviet Union, right? And so they've sort of used Ukraine's status and problems as a way to sort of guilt and milk money out of people without any particular love for Ukraine. Obviously, right after the revolution happened, they all could have just jumped on planes, left America or the West, and went back to Ukraine, right?
Well, here's the problem with that. When the Soviet Union was collapsing and they knew that Ukraine was going to be free, they said, oh shit, we're not ready for this. We don't like these people. They're too Soviet for us. We've never had a chance to do this. These are not our people. They're Soviet scum. That's what they are. And here's the kicker, too. They only thought they were going to get part of Vinnytsia Oblast, Lvov, and Carpathia. They thought that was Ukraine. Because traditionally everything else was Russia. You have to understand that you're looking at, everybody talks about, they were little Russians. Well, guess what? There was two sides to that, which is why it was called Ukrainians, the border peoples. You had the little Austrians, and you had the little Russians. And it was Austria that started nationalism. And the whole point of it was, things were looking pretty cool in the Russian Empire, for the people over here. And the Austrians didn't want them to get distracted. So they started a propaganda thing. Well, Russians make bad vodka, we make better stuff. You really don't want that, you might get poisoned kind of deal. Whatever it was, okay? Nationalism was, we have two-tier loyalty. You're loyal to us, the Austrians, and you're loyal to your government, and screw everybody else. So when we go to war, you go to war. Well, they didn't go to war. World War I with Germany, they fought with them. World War II with Germany, they fought with them. They never fought against them. All right? They were these Ukrainians that became the diaspora. Now, what was actually left in Ukraine after World War II, you had the Stalin cleaning up Bandera to a degree, and then a period of forgetfulness. We're going to forget these people. We don't even want to write about what they are. All right? Let them be. Well, the people that were left were just low-end privates and whatever, all lower-tier soldiers. All the officers, all the people of import went out into the diaspora. So Bandera's people left with an army, literally. That's who they were. They were not normal people. What makes them not normal people is that, and people don't know this, I'm not making light of what Adolf Hitler did, but his people did not have the stomach for the Holocaust. The Ukrainian Bandera ate it up. That was their deal. They enjoyed the hell out of it. Okay? The Croatians the same way. The Ustasha were especially brutal. They had knives on their wrists and they throw babies up and catch them. They had the only children's death camp. Okay? But the Bandera were their equal in horror. And you're looking at they killing, 2-3 million civilians in your own country. Well, what was their own country? I'm talking around from the edge of where what's now West Ukraine, it's Poland, to where the Russian Empire began. Everything else was Russia. Now, the big beef the Ukrainian nationalists have with Donbass right now, and this is the reality of it. Now, imagine yourself being brought up and told your grandparents were heroes. Grandma and grandpa fought in the Great War, damn it. And old Granny lost her leg, okay? But she's tough. That's your grandma. Look at those medals. But every time a veterans parade comes by, they have to hang their head in shame. And you grow up with the anger that your grandparents have to hang their head in shame. 2-3 times a year. How many veteran holidays do we have to have? You hate the things because they hurt grandma's feelings, because of the sacrifices no one appreciates. Well, Maidan comes around. Now, Grandpa can wear his iron cross. And Grandma can wear her iron cross. And the soldiers that were marching and celebrating their great victory before, now they have to hang their head in shame. But your grandparents were Nazis, attacking Soviets, Russians, Ukrainians, everybody, Poles, everybody. And right now, the grandchildren of the people that committed the Holocaust across Ukraine and in Donbass, really in Donbass, those grandchildren are fighting the grandchildren of the people the grandparents massacred. Does that make sense to you? So, under the same flags and symbols that their grandparents were mauled by, Donbass is suffering under those same symbols. You have to understand it's not politics. In Donbass, it's life and death. They were attacked with military-grade weapons, and the first time it happened, people held their hands up. This is what it was like. Men and women walking up to tanks, putting them on it. What are you doing? You're our people. You're our people. Well, they were their people right until they ran them over. And they were running them over. And Donbass had nothing to do with politics. When the referendum came around, it was for federalization. But all the way through that, I did the only cross-region check of passports of our soldiers, Donbass, 2014. Because, and I only did it because the West was saying, Russian soldiers are here, Russian soldiers are here, Russian soldiers are here. At the time, I had a collapsed lung. It had collapsed in 2014. And I kept so busy trying to write articles defending Donbass. It was 3 years before I had the surgery to fix it. Every passport I saw, well, almost every, it's Ukrainian. We are Ukrainian. It's not, well, we're going to break free and we have these politics, go team. We're Ukrainian. They need to listen to us. Someone needs to listen to us. They need to stop this. Why? Because the nationalists were attacking the people. And that's what was going on. But it wasn't, we're breaking free, man. It was, we need to stop them from killing us. And, you know, this is the way it happened. So what did they want? They wanted Kiev to talk to them. They wanted the assurances that Yarosh and his little gang of mutants weren't going to kill them. Why? Because they were sneaking into Lugansk and Donetsk and the cities and the towns, and they were murdering people. The first thing that lit up in the spring was Dmitry Yarosh sent these videos across social media to what they considered social leaders or influencers. He demanded that all police chiefs quit. Private sector was taking over the police departments. And to make the point, he went into the police chief in one of the towns at Donetsk, okay, close enough to the center to be called Donetsk, in his apartment in front of his wife. He slit his throat. I have no idea what they did to the woman before they killed her. But this is what 2014 was like for all of us. And the fight that they fight right now, this is very fresh. It's going on now. As Ukraine is leaving, they're mauling people. As these people are leaving, they're mauling people. And right now, if I had my druthers, I would rather be back in Donbass working, because that's all I can think about. What's going on with my neighbors? What's going on with my friends? I've got people on the front line. Some of them have been injured. I don't know if they're alive or not. And that's what Russia is stopping in terms of what they're calling a denazification program. You're getting a glimpse of what that actually means, talking to me. And at least I hope so. It's just that important. It's saving that many lives. We'd have been dead otherwise.
Okay, guys, I have to tell you one sort of embarrassing reality of things. We unfortunately wasted the majority of our time with George Eliason due to some technical errors, so I'm kind of embarrassed about that. I was really fascinated by what he was able to say. So here's the deal. If you have some questions, please send them to me. Don't comment in these videos. I don't read the comments because they're just a lot of FUs to me. Send me some questions that you have for George, especially related to like this whole the birth of the Ukrainian, today's Ukrainian ideology, about these people he mentioned like Bandera, Stitsko, and Melnik, and so on and so forth. If you have any questions about all that, send those to me, and I want to do sort of a part 2 interview with him, maybe over Zoom in the near future, because I'm kind of embarrassed. I feel like because of this technical problems, we really lost the chance to really dig even deeper to this very interesting aspect of the war in Ukraine. But anyways, guys, we all F up sometimes. Hopefully, you can forgive me. God will hopefully forgive me for screwing up. And anyways, we'll see you in the next episode of Tim Kirby Russia. I await your questions for George, because seriously, I'll ask him.